Hey, what European countries were the first to do some exploring of new land?
Portugal.
Portugal and Spain. I mean, it should be obvious looking on a map. They're the countries closest to the edge of Europe. And they were the two. All right. Any other questions? Okay, we need to cover a good bit of ground. About Africa, I want to wind up Africa pretty quickly. I may have mentioned this, but it's the continent with the most natural resources of any continent on the face of the earth. And I once heard that Russia is second. Siberia has a lot of natural resources, but Africa has a lot of gold and tin and iron, diamonds, yes. A lot of natural resources. But it's also the most diverse continent, not only the diverse as far as its people. In Africa, you'll find the pygmies that average about 4 foot tall, and the Watusi who average 7 foot tall. Big diversity of population among the people, and diversity of cultures. And it means that the future of Africa, your book asks, what's the future of Africa? And then they almost wind up saying it's foolish to even ask the question. That Africa has a big, diverse climate, diverse people, diverse land. The hottest part of the world is in Africa, the Sahara Desert, where temperatures go up to 170 degrees. Well, that's hotter than it is on the inside of your car on a hot summer day. And at night, the same desert can get down to almost freezing. The hurricanes that we experience have their origins in the Sahara Desert and then cross the Atlantic and become big storms as they cross. Very jungle land, dense jungle land also. And yes, they do have some winter time, particularly in the South African region, where that sometimes the temperatures get quite cold. They have some tall mountains. Very diverse place. All right. We want to move on from Africa to the Middle East. Your book calls it a crescent of conflict. If you know anything about your ancient history, it's been said that civilization began in this region that's sometimes called the Fertile Crescent, this being the Tigris and Euphrates River over here, and the land of Palestine over here, and much of the rest of this area is desert. But in between the deserts, there's an area, a crescent area called the Fertile Crescent, and it's now known because the chief religion of that area uses the crescent as its symbol. The area is in turmoil right now, and was at the time your authors wrote. The people there, again, are in constant conflict with each other. And this has been going on for some time, but if anything, it's been getting a whole lot worse instead of better, with no end in sight. So to start off, one of the main sources of contention is the question of Palestine. I've already touched on that several times already, but essentially, all right, let's back up in our history a little bit. With the case of Palestine, who owned it?
British.
The British in 1940. Well, you go back farther. Before the British had it, the Ottoman Empire had it. Before the Ottoman Empire, it was owned by the Abbasids, the Abbasids, and the Umayyads. Before that, all the Syrians have had it from time to time. And go on back before that, the Byzantine Empire had it. And then go on back before that, the Romans had it. And if you go back far enough, the Jews had it. Well, then when did the Palestinians own it?
Never. Ever.
Never. All right. They don't like to hear that, but the Palestinians have never owned it. It's gone back and forth between various other groups, a lot of them foreigners. Unless you say the Palestinians are descendants of the ancient Philistines, And the Philistines would have lived, I mean, we know the Philistines existed. They lived about, well, they disappeared from history about 600 BCE. But even they did not have all the land. So actually, the Philistines have never been able to claim that they had all the land. The Philistines had the region around Joppa and Gaza and some of those places, what we now would call the Gaza Strip. But as far as the Palestinians ever having owned the land, they never did. But nevertheless, they claim that it's theirs. They claim that they simply will not get let go of. Anyway, it was promised to the Jews in 1917. The British realized that, hey, there's too much opposition. We just simply can't give the Jews. Then came World War II and the Holocaust. And the Jews began to clamor and very strongly, give us our old homeland back. So Great Britain turned the issue to the United Nations, and the United Nations voted to partition the land and let the Jews have the land that they were already living on. Who voted for the partition? Every nation in the Western Hemisphere. And of all people, China and even Stalin, the Russians, the Soviet Union voted for the partition. Germany began to make amends to the Jews by voting for the partition. Almost all of Western Europe did. Almost all the communist world did. Much of Africa voted for partition. The only people who didn't was Israel's Middle Eastern neighbors, and they said we're going to drive them into the sea. They engaged in 4 wars, which were lopsided. All right. Sometimes you're asked a question, you don't expect the question, and you don't have an answer right away. But when I was at Lockheed, more than 25 years ago, the man sitting behind me asked me, what good have we gained by our support of Israel? After I got home, I thought of an answer. Here's what we've gained. We've gained peace in our time. How's that? Israel got its weaponry from the United States. The Arab nations got their weaponry first from the Soviet Union, then from Russia. When Israel engaged the Arabs, with Israel using American-made weapons and the Arabs using Soviet-made weapons, the result was a rout, a battlefield rout. And a lot of the reason for it was the weapons the Israelis were using were far better weapons than any weapons that the Arabs had. In fact, Nasser, right here, leader of the United Arab Republic, said when you buy a tank from the United States, it works. Buy a tank from the Soviet Union and it doesn't work. There were 4 wars fought. One in 1948, one in 1956, then one in 1967. That's the first one I actually remember. The 1967 war occurred just as I was graduating from high school. Actually, I graduated on May 30th that year, and the war began June 6th and ended June 10th, my birthday. 6-day war, and it was a rout. Everything the Israelis did just blew the Arabs off the bat, and the Arabs were actually taking off their boots and running through the sand. And the 1956 war was about the same. Nasser tore off from the battlefield at top speed and kept on running till he got all the way to Cairo. And once at Cairo, he got together a bunch of other persons who had run from the battlefields, and they overthrew the ancient the line of the pharaohs. Pharaoh was the last one's name, Pharaoh. They overthrew Pharaoh. So now, the last war was fought in 1973. And this is called the Yom Kippur War because it occurred when the Arabs surprised the Israelis on Yom Kippur. And the Arabs were better prepared, and also the Arabs had better weaponry. And when that war was over, the Arabs would never engage the Israelis again. Well, they did. The Syrians engaged the Israeli aircraft one time, and the Syrians lost all 90 of their aircraft, and the Israelis lost nothing. The press used to say time is on the Arab side. It turned out not to be that way. Technology just exploded, and Israel got a hold of the technology. The Arab world did not. And the result is the Arabs will not engage the Israelis directly. Now, and a couple years ago, the Arabs decided to make one final plunge to drive Israel off the map. And folks, this is something you won't hear in an ordinary history book. Muammar Gaddafi said, let's go get him. A short time later, Muammar Gaddafi was dead. President Mubarak said we can now break that treaty we made 30 years ago. Within a few months, Mubarak was overthrown in a coup and died. But Muammar Gaddafi was also overthrown in a coup and killed by his own people. Saddam Hussein vowed to drive Israel to the sea. A short time later, Saddam Hussein was overthrown and he's dead. How can Israel survive? Simply this, folks. You've heard me say this before, and I think I'll repeat it. The Muslims would have conquered the world. Does anybody remember why didn't they? One reason. They would have. I really believe that, except for one thing. They started fighting among themselves. And right now, I'm talking about April 29th, 2014, Egypt is fighting Egypt really hard. Libya is still fighting Libya. Tunisia is fighting Tunisia. Syria, as one of us is painfully aware, Syria is still fighting Syria. And Israel is sitting right there in the middle of them, surviving. Okay, now, folks, I mean, I'm aware, I don't mean to offend anyone. I mean, I'm aware we have Muslims in this class. I mean, I never ask your religious beliefs, but some of you will tell me, and I'm aware of it. Okay, so what I'll do, if any of you want to say anything, I promise no argument. The floor is open. You're welcome to speak up. You can have your say. I mean, if this were evolution talking about, I might argue with you, but this is, you can have your say if you wish to. Anybody at all. Okay, apparently no one. All right, again, not wishing the Arabs ill in any way. All right, I'll move on. Nasser. All right, Nasser had the idea. Nasser was president of Egypt for a while. Egypt eventually got its independence from the nation that conquered it. Their book seems to say it was France. But actually, this had been under British and French administration. But if the French and British gave up all their colonies after World War II, so Nasser wanted to unite the whole Arab world, so he changed the name of Egypt to United Arab Republic. Now, if you look on the map today, you won't see the United Arab Republic, but some of the maps that I looked at when I was a kid showed that area to be called the United Arab Republic. It only lasted a short time. The goal was to unite all of the Muslim world with Nasser himself as the head. And folks, this is a goal that has been unachievable almost since the days of Muhammad himself, or maybe Muhammad's uncle who took over after Muhammad. They simply cannot unite. When the United Arab Republic failed, Nasser went on to try to unite some other all the Arab states he could, and he was able to get some of them united. In fact, your book says Algeria finally got its independence from France and decided to join with Egypt for a while. But they simply would not unite. In the meantime, living in Palestine was an organization called the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization. They were led for a long time by Yasser Arafat. I'm not sure I'm spelling the man's name right. Anyway, the PLO engaged in a lot of terrorism against Israel for a time. Then officially Yasser Arafat tried to rejoin the rest of the world, somewhat like Muammar Gaddafi tried to do eventually, and tried to denounce terrorism. But terroristic acts continued to be had against Israel. Make a long story short, when the Arabs realized they could not win on the battlefield, Israel had the big technological, they didn't have the numbers advantage, but they had the technological advantage. When they really could not win, they resorted to suicide bombings. At first, the suicide bombers were young men who would strap explosives themselves and go to a crowded marketplace, and when they got a big crowd, they'd detonate their explosives and blow themselves up. Well, they said, let's watch out for the young men, so then they resorted to using young girls.
And disabled people.
What's that?
And disabled people.
Yeah, young girl, disabled people, yeah, the idea was to try to do as much damage as can. The Israelis put up with this for several years. And finally said, we can't take this anymore, so they put the Palestinians inside big fences. I mean, the fences are, big, huge concrete fences, about 15 or so feet tall with barbed wire and glass on the top. Now, the Palestinians are allowed out, but here's the purpose of the fences. They guarantee that no explosive get in, because the Israelis carefully guard, no explosion get in. And then if an Arab wants to leave, or a Palestinian wants to leave, he has to pass through all kinds of bomb detecting and bomb sniffing dogs and bomb detecting devices. But they are free to come in and go out. But they can't carry explosives with them. And this has effectively stopped the suicide bombings. The Arabs said our rights are being violated. They appealed to the World Court, and the World Court ruled in their favor. The Israelis said, in effect, you are not the ones being blown to pieces by these people. We are. The walls stay up. The walls are still there.